Welcome, viewers, to this new episode of Beyond Phrenology. We have with us today Professor Joanna Rączaszek-Leonardi. She is a cognitive scientist in Poland at the University of Warsaw, where she runs a very interesting lab called the Human Interactivity and Language Lab. Uh, it's very hard to describe what she does in her own words. When you look at her publication profile, it seems like a scientist has an ADHD. So we can talk to her about almost any issue in cognitive science. She has been a great thinker, also a student of the great Howard Patty, who did some fundamental work and raised some fundamental questions regarding the origins of life and language. She has been, I think, one of the few students of Patty who has continued thinking along those lines. At least I'm not aware of anyone else, at least in the from the academic standpoint. And she has much wider interest encroaching on ecological psychology and embodied cognition. I met her, first time in Mexico at the International Society for Ecological Psychology, and we have been in touch. Currently, she is in the US for a sabbatical, hopping from labs to labs, and I think influencing all of those with her amazing ideas. Welcome, Professor Joanna, to Beyond Phrenology.
Yeah. Thank you. You are so kind. I'm hoping and learning most of the time. But yes, I've been lucky enough to have secure a fellowship here, a Becker fellowship, and it allows me to work on a book that is just in the very initial stages, but I'm happy to be able to learn from ecological psychologists at the University of Connecticut, especially. And I just wanted to take this chance and congratulate you on your podcast. I've seen already well, good number of the interviews. And I think it's really very rare that you have an opportunity to just talk in a slow manner and to develop some ideas without rushing and being very rushed by the timing or narrowed by the issues. So congrats, and I want to take over. I want to ask you what made you start this? Can you tell me just
So I've been
briefly?
asked this question a couple of times. I think it was a lack of community because I was feeling a lot lonely about scientific ideas. I had been living in this fantasy since my childhood about, these labs which you see on television, where people come in
Yeah,
and they just come up with an idea, then, they just start working on those ideas, together with other scientists who also are equally excited about those. And then reading about books from Feynman, for instance, the Manhattan Project. And I felt that the modern academic structure is not catering to that fantasy,
mm,
right? We are not very prompt and it's very hard to communicate. Written form of communication is generally very slow. So also it's hard to meet those, distant people of your choice, in a real world setting. So now technology is so advanced, I thought that maybe I'll start a channel. And everyone is a social media influencer now, so I thought, why not me? Yeah.
good.
Yeah, it's been great. It's a great opportunity to have people, and be able to discuss ideas. Also, to kind of disseminate those. Not everyone has time to read like 50 papers. Probably, that's a span of, the
Yeah.
topics you might cover in an hour or two. But a podcast is a really great uh, place where you can, at least feel the overview.
Yeah, I still have to switch from reading to listening. I haven't done this yet,
Mm.
but it sometimes helps when you cannot read to listen. Yes, and to see the people. I think it's so nice to see how the person behind the work, the
Exactly.
article or the book, and then you realize, hey, they are just people and they struggle with the same things that we do. It's really very nice.
That's very true. I mean, when I was a kid, I would read some books about, certain scientists, and they would feel like, I mean, like aliens, to be honest. And then when you
Yeah.
meet them, like as a scientist now, I'm friends with some of them. And They are more human than I ever thought.
Maybe you sometimes wish you haven't met them.
It's actually true sometimes.
Okay.
It's sometimes true. I agree with you. So okay. So one of the common themes in your work, Jana, is semiotics. Okay, semiotics, symbol grounding, the emergence of symbols, or in general, these discrete elements compared to the continuous form of life. So I want you to trace back a little bit of your training with Patty, and what exactly is your ultimate motivation, and where do you see it coming from, given that training you had?
Yeah, so I started, a long time ago in the University of Warsaw, and I was doing just a work on categorization. But this was the time, it was late 80s, early 90s,
Yeah,
when neural networks started to show up. And I was so amazed by the way those neural networks computed and how they were completely different, from algorithms, how they were, gracefully degrading instead of just breaking when the information was wrong or insufficient, how they were doing things in parallel, etc., etc., how many constraints could bear on the single process in a various way. It was just so different from what we then thought about thought processes that yeah, I was simply smitten by it, and started working on models of categorization within neural networks. But then I very quickly realized that you cannot really do it when you talk about humans. In the case of humans, you cannot really talk about categorization and not talk about language. I mean, language involves us so deeply, and we are communicative at the very base of our existence. And also, what was really striking for me is that language is studied usually as those, sequences of symbols that are discrete things, and yet we have to somehow make it bear on processes that are continuous, such as a process
yeah,
of categorization is a continuous process that results maybe in something that can be distinguished, but yet it is a continuous process. And I couldn't sort of put those two together. And I started then, I don't know, probably 30 years ago, and I'm still doing the same thing. It's like a, drunkard holding to a pole. That is just my problem. My problem is how to understand how discrete forms arise from continuous processes, and continuous processes in our brain,
hmm,
continuous processes in our experience, and continuous processes of our action and interaction with the world. All those are continuous, and yet there is this very strong feeling that language has something discontinuous, mathematics has something discrete, discontinuous, and those are forms that you can reuse and repeat and throw, like we are throwing right now between us. We are sort of throwing words that we have used before, and we
yeah,
use them as symbols, right?
yeah,
So how those two processes can be
mm,
related to each other? That was my. And you are asking from the times before I started reading Howard Patti. I was lucky enough. My then supervisor, Professor Andrzej Nowak, was in a collaboration with the Florida Atlantic University, and it was, before the. I think he started this collaboration even before the end of the Cold War, and the Berlin Wall fell, and the roundtable discussions in Poland, ending the communist era, had place, which was amazing. And he started a collaboration in which a couple of students could go to Florida Atlantic University. So
hmm,
I went there and I started to collaborate both with a Chomskyan psycholinguist who was interested in language and some philosopher of language, Lou Shapiro, and
Hmm.
with dynamical systems people.
Hmm.
And it was perfect because it was just, I don't know if that was what shaped this general clash and the general problem, or this or I seeked such such
Yeah.
advice. Probably both. From the reciprocal causality, this is uh, totally possible.
Hmm.
That both I was seeking and reinforcing those concerns. But it was so much fun because these people liked each other as
Hmm.
people, but they had completely different ideas about language. Lou Shapiro was a sort of a descendant of a Chomskyan branch of linguistics, and he thought that language is processed in the brain by representations.
Hmm.
And then people like Scott Kelso or Betty Teller were like, what in the what representations? What do you mean? And in the mind, it means where
Yeah.
exactly.
How?
So, so it was super to just be this.
You know,
I was kind of young and and innocent at that time, so it was hard sometimes for me, but it was also a lot of fun too.
have you seen the movie Inside Out?
Yeah.
I think that's how representations are managed in the brain. No.
Yeah. Yes, that's a good one. I didn't see the second part, but the
Hmm.
first part was a lot of fun.
Yeah. So I think whenever people say representations, in terms of like operations, I think that's what we think about, right?
Yeah, you need the entire world again to be
Yeah.
put inside in order
Yeah.
to.
Uh,
That's why you have
and
this infinite regress, right?
yeah, those little people, managing the dopamine, carrying dopamine from here to there might also have their own brains, right?
Exactly, exactly. So yeah, so that was, and then I was nagging Scott Kelso and
Mhm.
Betty Teller with those questions, but I know that you like the dynamics and you want everything to be a dynamical law, but
Mhm.
hey, somewhere in this dynamics, we as
Mhm.
human beings
Yeah.
put those replicable forms that shape our dynamics, and we
Yeah.
construct our own boundary conditions for our cognition. I mean, this is life, and you have to account for that. And then he said, okay, read this. And he gave me Howard Patty's papers, and I completely drowned in them. And that was a game changer for me,
So you
definitely.
you're challenging everyone there basically.
Well, I was just asking questions. I
Hmm.
think that Kelso and Teller, Betty Teller was studying language, so of course they were aware that something had to be done
That to be done.
very
Yeah.
profound to account for the dynamical systems approaches to
Yeah.
account for language.
And this thing you just mentioned, right? Like asking questions. Uh, Asking questions can be interpreted in multiple ways. I mean, we ask questions right now, but we ask very constrained questions. We decide boxes, and within the boxes we ask questions. So, for instance, for last 1 week, I have been thinking about sensory motor integration. We call the process of sensory motor integration, but do we know there's actually a process of sensory integration? I mean, we have a whole 4 decades of literature on sensory motor integration, but does it really happens?
I think there is rather a sensory motor differentiation, if you ask me.
Yeah.
But but yes,
So
that's yeah. But we put a lot of assumptions in every
assumptions, right?
question we
Are
ask.
there
Yeah,
actually mechanisms to integrate two different kinds of, sense data?
yeah.
Do we see coherence in them? Do we see, same kind of dynamics or dynamical coupling, or there's actually a process which integrates? And if there's a process which integrates, then what happens to that process? How is that process initiated? Like, can we explain diseases based on those processes? And it seems like sensory motor integration is a pretty, finicky concept. I don't think it has any.
Yeah,
Uh,
it begs a question: how did they ever get separated if they need
yes, exactly.
integration, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes, yes, yes.
and I think most of the times they didn't. They
No,
maybe did by our culture and by our ways of studying them. This is what
exactly.
happened with language, exactly. Yeah.
How so? How so? This happened with
Because
language?
Well, because the dominant approach to language is to treat language as an existing system of symbols, and then, for example, development is a great window to look at those processes. And people ask, okay, there is this language, this symbolic structure. How does a child ever, map
Hmm.
the perceived reality and
Yeah.
those entities of language? But when you look at the baby
Uh-huh.
and take the perspective of the baby
Yeah.
that doesn't know language, then there are no symbols for such baby floating around to
Hmm.
be mapped. There are behaviors of the parents
Yeah.
that sound in a funny way,
Yeah.
and there are events that happen in interaction always with the parents, and that's the data that the child, and there are also experiences from within this little child, and this is the data that the child has to work with, and
Hmm.
everything is super beautifully integrated. So
Yeah.
what actually child has to work on is to understand in the first place that there are symbols,
Hmm.
and then and then it's a whole lot of work to
Yeah.
to notice that, oh, so some of those weird behaviors that people do actually do belong into one modality. So then maybe differentiation of the vocal
Yeah.
modality,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And there is a lot of stuff happening there,
Hmm.
but it's happening together with my co-acting with my
Right. Right.
parent.
Right.
So, this is how it
But
goes bottom
but
up.
but
It's a
but just pun intended, that co-acting is not a problem, right? Because we cancel the afferents of our own actions already, right?
we what?
We do cancel we do cancel from the whole equation our own actions, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
According
That's
to the internal model hypothesis, right?
Yeah,
Almost at every
yeah.
scale.
So that's why I was also underscoring that those events are also in
Yeah.
relation to my own feelings, and my own feelings are also my feelings of my emotion
Mm.
in the interaction. So this is why we with Terry Deacon, we the collaborator, also a very important collaborator of mine, we coined this term, the ungrounding,
Hmm.
language ungrounding problem, or a symbol ungrounding problem, not a symbol grounding problem,
Hmm.
because maybe sometimes we do have symbol grounding problems, and definitely machines have the
Mm.
symbol grounding problem. But humans, when they are born, they have this symbol ungrounding problem. At first, have to notice that there is this layer of symbolic relations, or
Yeah.
relations within some layer, and then
Right.
um, then maybe
Right.
proceed to
Yeah.
understand.
And they have to discover, that layer themselves. It's. I mean, there's no specific way in which we teach language, for instance, to kids, right?
Yes,
And
yes,
if you talk about like kids with bilingual parents, the challenge is even, uh,
yeah.
pretty, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and from those children also you see that sometimes there are regions in interactive processes with parents that are conducted in one language or with
Hmm.
another language, or then there is a mixing of language, or but those children also, are fine and do their stuff with language
Yeah.
as they need. Then it is true that when they are tested in
Hmm.
one language, you may, with your test, not exactly fit this category of interactions that the child is conducting in this language, and
Hmm.
therefore the test will show that the children are delayed, or they will have problems at initial problems at school even. And there
Hmm.
is a very nice work by Professor Eva Hamann and collaborators in my university that shows this, that this is not taken into account, this complexity of how people use two languages in testing, for example, right? So
Right. Right.
yeah,
Also, it's interesting that kids have to communicate a lot. If they have a sibling of their own age or younger sibling, that sibling does not even have that language which they have. So they
right.
have to cater to these organisms who do not yet have the language, and then they have to cater those parents who are pretty well versed with language. Then they go to school where they have this whole classroom of students, equally, handicapped with language, and then you have this teacher well versed. So they're trying to manage all sorts of, language abilities.
Yes, and also how different languages we speak in every context is amazing. I had a funny example in I don't know if my children think it was very funny, but it was amazing to observe. My husband is Italian, so he spoke to them Italian when they were very small, and we lived in Poland.
Hmm.
And every year we traveled to Italy during vacation, and then my
Yeah.
children spoke to other children in
Uh,
Italian, but
hmm.
they were looked at the beginning very weirdly because they spoke this adult Italian, that
uh,
was not the so when you're talking about peers in the classroom, then
uh,
you need also another language and another linguistic skills in order to fit in this environment. And it took a couple of years for my
hmm.
children to really catch this. Not maybe a couple of years, maybe a couple of weeks. At the end of each period when we went to for vacation to Italy, I already heard them, you know, intonating differently,
Hmm.
accentuating differently, using different words, different syntax, simplifying, and so on, or complicated thing in a different way. It's amazing how this differs, and this differs because language lives in interaction. It's not one language, but it is probably slightly different when we talk to each person.
And at the level of, talking about continuity and, discreteness, the same is the challenge at the cellular level, right? Like cells are more like a continuous process of, fluid interactions, and then you have the DNA,
Mhm.
which is basically discrete, right? So can you talk a little more on that?
Yeah, there is a lot of work that put together those two mysterious things, the DNA code, as it is often called, and language. Roman Jakobson was one of them, or Jacques Monod, or Jacob. But yeah, and indeed there is something similar. I mean, it is difficult to say that, when we look at DNA is a physical thing, and it
Hmm.
is also a continuous thing. But it is true that that life has found this mystery of a replicable physical structure that then becomes a constraint on a reconstruction of the next cell.
Hmm.
This was noticed already by many people, of course, and even before maybe the whole mystery of DNA. I don't think the whole mystery of DNA is discovered even now, but
Of course, yeah.
before we knew as much about DNA as we know now. So von Neumann, for example, wrote about it already in 56 and 66, I think, that living organisms have those two. I mean, they use one structure in two different ways. So
Hmm.
one structure, such as DNA, is sort of used as an internal description of the cell, but not a description in the sense of rendering the whole cell, but
Yeah,
rather as boundary conditions on physical processes that lead to reconstruction of the cell.
yeah,
But in order to do this very structure has to be, in a sense, read in two different processes. One process is for replicating the structure.
yes,
Another process is for rendering the cell, right?
yeah.
So those are two different processes that develop probably in a little bit different trajectories,
Hmm.
evolutionary trajectories. One is favoring the accuracy of copying, right? Keeping mutations to a reasonable level. The other one is rather concerned with
Yeah,
the with the
housekeeping.
control process. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So
So,
it's
so now,
really interesting how and then yes, just to finish it.
yeah.
then, of course, Howard Patti also is elaborating on this work. And what I was trying to do is take those insights that theoretical biology
Hmm.
and physicists mainly that looked at biology in physical terms,
Yeah.
that take those conclusions and questions also and apply them to linguistic system. I was encouraged by people
Right.
like Jacobson and others who saw this
Hmm.
parallel. Of
Yeah.
course, one has to be very careful with this parallel, but nevertheless, some systemic properties seem amazingly similar.
Yeah. But don't you think similar stuff happens at the level of language as well, where language is used both for communication as well it is used both for continuation of a culture, in terms of, whether we writing books or whether we are, everything basically we are writing down, to pass on to the next generation.
Yes, yes,
Right?
even absolutely. And well, here you mentioned phenomena from two time scales. So one time
Yeah.
scale is when we are communicating now and we are interacting and we are also producing and we are right now evolving language also.
Right,
I mean,
right, right, right.
we
Yeah,
are
yeah.
this part
Yeah.
active part of language evolution. I
Hmm.
always feel very proud of that. I mean,
Hmm.
this moment is also part of evolution. But also it accumulates as a culture, as sort of a set of boundary conditions and constraints that gives a shape to the whole culture. But I think also we can look at the same scale and see those processes that von Neumann was talking about and Patti was talking about. This copying and controlling or constraining division.
Hmm.
Because, for example, when you have some dangerous book, let's say, or dangerous or
Yeah.
kind of scary when looking what it has done to culture, of course, with other events, and
Hmm.
you just copy it, just use Xerox machine and copy
Yeah.
it in you can copy the physical structure, but
Yeah.
nothing wrong will happen until people will start reading it,
Right, right, right,
right?
right, right.
So it also has this strange
Relationship, yeah.
duality of process that within which language is engaged. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. So is it that there's something about replication or preserving that the continuous process cannot be preserved and cannot be replicated? That wherever, we have to create a copy, it has to be through a bottleneck of, discretization.
Yeah, yeah, it is. It has in order for something to be copied, it sort of has to have a beginning and end because otherwise you will never copy it in its entirety. I
Yeah.
mean, you can have sort of processes that repeat, like limit cycles or just cycles of relations that come back, right?
Hmm.
So dynamical structures can be repeated as well, but can they be replicated? That's a very good question. I also feel that there is something about discreteness and copyability that forms that we use. Yeah, mm, they sort of use this for propagation of the constraints that occurred to be successful, right? So there
Hmm.
is something there are two different processes. It's kind of so it's not intuitive and it's also so non-reductionistic in some sense, to admit to some kind of dualism, because I don't want to call it some kind of duality. I don't want to call it dualism, because dualism, it's immediately you think about, souls and
Yeah, yeah,
minds and bodies, or souls and bodies.
yeah. Right.
So it's a very interesting change also, that first we thought about souls and bodies and then about minds and bodies. But I don't mean this kind of dualism. I mean rather that we need to think in two different um, conceptions, in both in some symbolic descriptions and in dynamical descriptions, in order to capture the fact that we need both laws that are describable in dynamics, and we
Hmm.
need symbols which describe the forms that act as constraints on the dynamics.
Right. So
What?
does it mean that we cannot categorize the dynamics?
What do you mean by not? We cannot categorize the dynamics.
So okay, so there's a continuity in this discrete replication, right? Like for instance, there is a DNA, the cell forms, and then
Mm-hmm.
again the DNA is replicated, right? There is no point in time there's no DNA, right? Right. And there's no point in time where the dynamics is governing the DNA, right? I mean, of course, there can be mutations and things like that, but there's no encoding or discretization of the dynamics. The
Mm-hmm.
DNA is not basically taking or encoding the whole state of the cell at any point and keeping it as a history for the next replication, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know,
That's true.
you might be able to trace certain environmental conditions, let's say, lack of certain, chemical in the environment or lack of certain
Mm-hmm.
molecule, uh, based on what effect it may lead to DNA, and what kind of mutations it can lead to. And that's how we trace evolution, right? Or evolutionary history. But there's no point in which it is encoding the dynamics. Or do we know
Yeah.
of any example in
Yeah.
the real world where the dynamics is encoded in a symbolic form?
No, I see what you mean. I think each symbolic system relies on the dynamics that is already there. Because you cannot just take DNA, throw
Yeah,
it in the river,
right.
and the cell
Yeah,
will not result from that, right?
yeah,
The symbolic system counts on or relies on the dynamics that has been always in
yes.
there for the evolution, and it's because it is just a constraint and just a boundary condition
Hmm.
on the dynamics that has to be there. So you are right. I didn't understand the question as categorization of dynamics, because I think you can categorize dynamics when you are a living system. Then you can differentiate different kinds of dynamics,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
are also dependent on how you have to act within this dynamics. So
Uh-huh.
definitely some categorization is possible for a cognizing subject, but I think that in this question that you posed, okay, can DNA encode the total dynamics that has been there? First of all, it doesn't have to, and
Hmm.
it has to only in artificial systems.
Yeah.
You can think about artificial systems like that everything has to be reconstructed. Even the physics is reconstructed in the computer
Hmm.
for games and other processes and
Yeah.
modeling, right? And so it doesn't sort of rely on physics as it is, but it remodels it for
Hmm.
certain purposes. Nevertheless, it remodels it, of course, on physical devices that have to conform to laws of physics, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But I think the problem that we are posing, okay, can we therefore make cognition only symbolic?
Yeah.
No.
Right. So now if we talk about cognition now,
Mhm.
uh are we leading to symbol grounding problem in some ways?
Yeah,
Uh
yes. I think it's just telling you that you cannot really describe a cognitive system resorting only to symbols. So you need to account also for the dynamics in which the
Dynamics.
system is functioning. And this is a
Okay.
straight road to ecological psychology, which says very clearly that you cannot study just a cognitive system. You always
Hmm.
have to study cognitive system in relation to the dynamics in which the system functions. And then what is a point in favor to the computational approaches to cognition, because I really would like them to finally start integrating, is that yes, we do rely on replicable forms in order to tame this dynamics
Hmm.
of interaction. And it's not enough to just resort to dynamics, because we as living processes and as humans, sort of in a double way, once with our DNAs and second time with our language, but probably other processes, proto-symbolic or mathematics, for example, we are putting those forms in the way of our own dynamics.
Hmm.
So it is impossible to describe us, or I hope it's impossible to completely describe us anyway, because we are creative systems. But
Hmm.
it's not possible to understand our behavior, even to some extent for some purposes, when we just rely on the dynamics or
Or
on
on
the
the
symbol.
symbols. Okay.
Right.
But do we have any idea like of the bridge between the two in, let's say, human cognition in the brain? So let's say we talk about the dynamics versus symbolism. So what would be a symbol in the brain? Is spike train or the rate coding in the spike actually a symbol? Because then also
Mm.
it's a dynamics, right? Like
Mm-hmm,
how,
mm-hmm.
if let's say we have the brain which can encode symbols, how would that be?
Yeah.
And that,
So
yeah.
I know too little about the brain to. Your question sounded a little bit like the question that von Neumann posed in his 56th paper. He was sort of thinking about, okay, are neurons really working discretely?
Hmm.
Can we ascribe some symbolic processes to them? He finally says in this paper that we probably, if we keep looking at how brain solves various problems of acting in the environment, then we would probably have to invent new kinds of mathematics. It will change
Hmm.
our notion of mathematics. But I think that I myself know too little about the brain to stipulate about symbols on this level, because I think we haven't yet utilized the explanatory value of the symbols that are forms, systematic forms that we have in the environment. And first, they are there. Language is there. We can measure language. We can
Hmm.
do beautiful statistical things with language, as recently LLMs large language models are showing. Those are forms that can be, well, almost computable, or at least stochastically related to each other
Hmm.
for various purposes. So we do have those forms that are so systematic, and we can study how those forms act back on the dynamics of our brains.
Hmm.
And I prefer to leave them for now outside, because I know that there exist outside. The language exists outside, right? I'm speaking to you. I'm making sound waves. They reach you through various wires and so on, incredibly. And let's just for me, I am a language scientist and a cognitive scientist. I think that we know still so little about the brain that I
Hmm.
prefer to study something that I can see, touch, measure as a replicable form within the dynamics, and first do research on this. How the brain, if the brain creates its own symbols. I don't know, but even if it does, then they would also be carried by dynamics, and you will never, it's fractal, you will never be able to describe brain only resorting to symbols, because
Uh,
they,
so can you elaborate on that? Because it is fractal, you will not be able to.
well, I used fractal metaphorically, so you see the same the same problem of symbol dynamics complementarity on
Hmm.
different levels of
Okay.
the scale,
Or
on
the
different
neural,
scales.
yeah, of behavior
Yes.
or neural tissue. Yeah.
Yes, yes. It's fractal in many other senses, probably, or
Yeah.
in the proper sense of the
Fractal as
fractality,
it is. Yeah.
probably it is. But this is what I meant is that the problem is sort of fractal. When whichever scale you look at, will it be the scale of us conversing now, where
Hmm.
the symbols and dynamics are evidently needed for description of and understanding of what we are doing, or when you are looking at I don't even know, single cells in the brain. I don't know what level in the brain you would have to look at, but I would suspect that the same problem of discrete events being carried by dynamics will be probably also somehow there. I mean, the necessity to resort to a complementarity of dynamics and symbols will be there.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes complete sense.
Mm.
Okay. Okay. So let's lighten a little bit. Uh, Going back to empirical stuff. So how do you approach, some of these questions empirically in your lab?
Mm. So for me, a very important moment was getting a grant on research on early semantic processes, early semantic development. And we, with two great researchers, Katarina Rolfing and Iris Nomikou, we got funding to look at early processes of mother-infant interaction and father-infant interaction too, but unfortunately in their data there were not too many fathers. Uh, and we treated this process as I told you at the beginning of our conversation. So as starting from not assuming that children realize that there is language there
Mhm.
that they have to map onto something, which is the assumption of predominant number or most research in development. And we asked the question, okay, so let's look at the interaction. Let's look at what is going on at the semantics of each interaction, and then assuming that semantics is already somehow there, let's look at what language does to it. So language is a constraint only in emerging interaction, and makes it more flexible, makes it more functional. It allows a child and the parent to do more things than without language,
Hmm.
but the interaction is already there. You know, the emotions, the relations between them are already there. And on top of this, language, I mean, from this interaction, language has to first be individuated by the
Yeah.
child,
Yeah.
and then it never is completely ungrounded. I mean, then the child can open a book and read language as well, right?
Yeah.
Somehow miraculously. But nevertheless, when we come back to real interaction, the meaning of what we say in language is not only carried by language, right?
Right. Right.
So this is,
It's
yeah,
kind of diffused in the interactions as well.
yes, yes, and
Yeah.
so this is the I forgot what your question was and why it was supposed to be lighter,
Oh.
because I'm coming back to, as you can see, to the same problem of dynamics and symbols.
Yeah.
But maybe let's make it lighter by looking at a concrete example
Hmm.
of development. So
Hmm.
you can see that, before language comes, a child already knows how to co-act with the caregiver, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
They can do a lot of stuff together from the moment that the child is born and when the child is clinging, more
Hmm.
or less, depending on how I carry. the child and wants to be fed and has the basic needs fulfilled, there are already those pragmatic modes that in which we interact, and only within this language
Hmm.
starts to make sense.
So for the child interacting or, let's say crying for food, is there any algorithmic process that if I will cry, kind of a prediction, right? If I will cry, the food would be coming, right? Or I would be
Hmm.
catered. And therefore, I mean, is there any rationalization, do you think, in physiology for a child, or is it more a response where, let's say, there's some hormone which goes below, certain threshold, the
Mm.
hunger strikes and the child, kind of
Mm.
cries. Or do you think
Mm.
there's rationalization? Like when do you think that rationalization actually starts happening?
Oh, first I would have to know what rationalization means or what you mean by that.
Or this algorithm,
Uh, but I think those, evolution of such signaling as crying has very little to do with rationalization. It is, but it is, it's a very good example of the fact that crying is a systemic relation
Mm-hmm.
and not. We shouldn't, I think, think about it. Oh, I am a child, I will emit a stimulus which will bring me milk, right? Because
Hmm.
it will be a stimulus for my mother. My mother will have a reaction,
Yeah,
and and then she will feed me, and then it gets reinforced. So next time I
yeah,
cry harder.
yeah,
Well,
exactly.
uh, uh, I think that in evolution of such process,
Hmm.
it evolves already as an interactive process. And by thinking, as I sort of caricaturized, we think about it as two individuals. Yes,
Hmm.
they are doing something with each other, but it's not a true interaction. And when we look at it as a system of a baby and a caregiver,
Hmm.
you can see that, for example, the cry of the own baby will
Hmm.
be very much distinguishable for the parent,
Hmm.
and that it will elicit some, very it will make more probable, it will
Hmm.
constrain the parent, right,
Hmm.
in a sort of predetermined way for the signal to evolve.
Yeah.
So it's a different perspective. Just again, we do not assume that first there were babies and mothers and they had to somehow learn how to be with each other.
Hmm.
No, the mother baby system is a primary system.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And then they individuate. I
yeah.
mean, as a mother, I
Wait.
can tell you that it's not a straightforward process for a mother
Yeah.
to be individuated as a person from motherhood also. So it
Right.
is, again, this assumption, oh, they were separate individual minds, they have to work somehow together. No. I mean,
Hmm.
they evolved as a system joined by some signaling, yes, but it's the signaling wasn't to put them together. It's also to differentiate them.
I think neuroscience and cognitive science is still very communist in their mentality, in the sense they think that, everything has to be arranged and
Yeah,
catered,
yeah, 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 yeah.
right?
So I don't know
Yeah.
how to change this, and it's very
Hmm.
difficult because even in our studies on language development, you really cannot start with language, and it's
Yeah.
easier to start with language because language, it's pretty comparing to
Huh.
interaction in life, it's pretty simple. You can say, okay, it's 40,000 units put
Huh.
in the combinatorial way. Of course, you can make infinite number of phrases and sentences from that, but at least it's somehow, studyable. Whereas when you start with interaction, you rather say, oh, what are these people doing together? And there are also infinite number of things that they are doing together.
Yeah.
But that they can be doing together, but they are not doing infinite number of things. There are
Yeah.
some synergies on
Hmm.
the level of interaction that people are doing together. And we haven't studied that enough because it's much more difficult to study. It all is in movement, it's all dynamics. It's all based more on values than some straightforward computation. So the mother and children, they have to keep each other safe. They fed, warm, but also respected, but also somehow agentive. Each gives the other agency in the interaction. Those are all very complex things that are characterizing interaction before language comes.
Hmm.
So see how I think this unity,
Yeah.
this is very much Jamesian also, right? This is how
Hmm.
William James thought about psychology. That I'm very grateful to two scientists, Dember and Heft, who
Hmm.
pointed out that this very often quoted phrase from William James that a child is confronted with blooming, buzzing confusion of stimuli. And
Hmm.
poor child has to put all of this together. And oh my goodness, how difficult this is.
It
But
is, yeah.
no, actually, this is not what this is the most misquoted quote from William James. He actually says that the child feels one blooming, buzzing confusion in its oneness, in its unity, because they all happen to this child. So the experience of the child
Okay.
is this unity. And
Hmm.
then the blooming, buzzing is maybe from, the some external point of view. I don't know, but
Yeah.
it is felt as a unity, and
Yeah.
what our biggest driving force in
Yeah.
cognition is to keep this unity happy. Well,
Yes.
whenever something is outside of this unity, then you strive, you have a dissonance, it's a
Right.
motivation to act also, right?
I used to think that kids are very brave because if there's an organism which is like 10 times my size, I would not dare to go near them. But kids, but the way kids behave, they're pretty daring.
Yep,
And
yep,
when you
yep.
especially look at the optic flow of like a adult, let's say there's a kid in the cradle and the adults kind of go and, peep in the cradle, the optic flow would be like really, really fast and heavy.
Yes, this is what the children in their little, crib, what they see. I can
Mm.
demonstrate it to you. It's scary. It's like,
Yeah,
oh, hello.
yeah, exactly.
And
Ex-
yeah, Linda Smith with her students, she showed very nicely that I don't remember now, but about 30% of the time
Mhm.
of the waking hours of the baby is occupied by the faces,
Mm.
at the very beginning. And
Yeah.
so we think, oh, it's a physical reality, how this child can deal with laws of physics. The child does not have those problems at the beginning.
Mhm.
The child has problems how to deal with very, very social objects, and which are other people, and
Mhm.
how to control them to stay, safe and warm, right? So this is a
Mhm.
very different physics, which sometimes we call social physics, that
Mhm.
is conventional. It has its own timings, and if we are good with those timings, even
Mhm.
if you are a baby,
Yeah,
you will be more successful in this interaction. So it's an ability to coordinate to dynamical events that matters, right? So.
definitely. So where I was heading to, initially with my question about the rationalization was, uh, do we need language to think? I mean, it has been a question, right? Can we think
Mhm.
without language? And it's hard to know, right? Because I don't have any memories for a time where I did not have language. So the question is that, so when we think about the brain, when we think about the cognition, let's say David Marr's, three level of hypothesis,
Mhm.
we have the algorithm, we have implementation and realization of that. So are we thinking about the brain from that perspective just because we have a language where we can discretize these physical, continuous processes?
Mm.
Or there's actually a time in development where things change in terms of our cognition, and now processes become more algorithmic because I mean, for
Oh my
instance,
goodness, I hope not.
yeah, I mean, we are superimposing the same kind of processes now. For instance, a lot of neuroscience is rat neuroscience, right? Mouse neuroscience. Uh, we definitely don't invoke these terms for Hydra, for instance, or C. elegans, but at the same time, we invoke all these, algorithms as soon as we start studying, some other organisms, like rats and mice and marmosets and humans.
Mhm.
So, so is it real, or is it again the way we think in language, and that's the reason we are imposing these algorithms on, cognitive
Mhm.
processes?
I think fortunately we only think about like this in language and in mathematics. We think also in math. I think we think in language maybe in a similar way that we think in mathematics. Some people are very good in mathematics. It's a formalism. It's a use of certain replicable forms, and they are super good at that.
Hmm.
Does it mean that they only think in mathematics? Does it mean they don't think about in language because they think in mathematics? I think it's a sort of way to partition the anything that you study or look at according to some replicable forms that we have available. And the more experience you have with them, the more you will be prone to thinking in those terms, just like, I don't know I don't know if you have ever played bridge the whole night, then, you look at the reality and you see everything in four colors of the cards, and you can even feel that something is like spade or like a figure in a card. We are like that. It is this kind of entanglement that Alvano writes about it, that this practice of engaging with those forms will, of course, have. And William James also said the more you do something, the more you see the reality in this category. So yes, you are right, we might be thinking like that increasingly, but our language, I think, caters not only to science. That's why it's called natural language. It caters, it is present in all domains of human life, and science is just one of the domain. The other is art, for example, or yet other is the domain of interpersonal relationships, or that are not, and maybe they don't have to be based on science. So I don't. I think. Yes, some kinds of I kind of worry about the sampling of language, for the large language models.
Hmm.
Is the sampling also biased towards scientific language? We can talk about it later because there is a lot of worrying stuff going on there. But I think that, because the way you phrased it, it sounded like scientists are making those discoveries. They go through language and they influence us humans. Fortunately, language influences us humans only to a certain degree.
Hmm.
Some of us more than others, probably, but fortunately, we all the time have our continuous processes of interaction with other people, of
Hmm.
doing stuff in the world,
Hmm.
which is only partially language dependent. Language is only a constraint. It's not the whole thing. The meaning is made in interaction each time anew, practically. And especially you can see it in abstract concepts, right? It's
Oh
so
yeah.
difficult to define an abstract concept, but every time you talk about some abstract concept, you negotiate. Okay, are we
Hmm.
talking about language in this way? Yes, no, that's fine. And maybe some other people will do it differently.
Hmm. And then that makes sense. My my concern is more about how we think about, what exactly happens in okay, cognition and the brain.
Mm,
Let's discuss a little bit about mechanisms and process. So when we say that something is a process, right? Let's say we have a river flowing from some mountains like Himalayas and moving to Bay of Bengal, for instance, Um, in and creating like a large delta, okay, into like riverines, and then finally, small, very small kind of flows, which goes to the ocean, right? Falls to the ocean. Now, is it a process? So when delta is formed, can we characterize this as a process of this is the process through which delta is formed, or should we call it a mechanism of delta formation? Ha- so when we talk about brain processes, when we talk about brain mechanisms, right? One thing is at the level of description of neurophysiology. For instance, this is the neural tract which connects, these two areas of the brain. For instance, these projections of the neurons, and they are
Mhm.
also innervated by, for instance, neurons from these receptors. That's one level of description, right? Where we can create kind of a physiological loop that if you stimulate, for instance, this part of the hand, you might have neural activity through these projections. Then you have these cognitive mechanisms, which are more
Mhm.
abstract, right? We say this are the mechanisms. Some people also call them processes. So what exactly are processes and mechanisms when we talk about these in
Mhm.
cognition?
I think it's an excellent question. And I think that people are trying to define what they mean by mechanisms for last several tens of years. There are at least, I don't know, several, probably tens of books on that.
Hmm.
And I think that the difficulty also to say what is a mechanism exactly. Is a mechanism sufficient to account for description of cognitive process? I think you are right that again we were talking about fractals and seeing the
Hmm.
same problems everywhere. Well, this is an instance of the same problem. I think that I prefer the word process because the word mechanism, it is very mechanistic and it associates in my head with something mechanical, and something mechanical associates in my head in something that engineers design in a very well controlled conditions. And it is mechanical because it's predictive and you do not expect much creativity. But then you can also talk about mechanisms for creativity. So, so I think the use of
Hmm.
the word is very, it's very sort of non-uniform. And why I don't like using the mechanism. I think I sometimes use the mechanism when something I feel that is pretty kind of independent for a time from the change in boundary conditions. It's like
Hmm.
stable for some time, ergodic for some time, just showing some sort of even stagnant property. But I'm very reluctant to talk about mechanism when it comes to human cognition in general, because it's such a creative and wild process, like a
Hmm.
river or like life itself, that it is a sort of mechanism of life that doesn't strike me as a right word. A mechanism, mm, it is probably connected with also our propensity to make models to understand something, and then
Hmm.
models we can show by simulations that they can, almost mechanistically we can show some process. But then this contextuality of everything in
Yeah.
cognition will sooner or later break this little machine that we made for this particular bounded process.
Yeah.
And that's so mechanisms are maybe a useful way of thinking when you have a particular thing to do in the world. And
Hmm.
this is very important. You have a particular pragmatic goal, and then your whole scientific process which is of course wild and unconstrained because everything is interesting, but then it gets constrained by this very goal that you have.
Hmm.
And so
Hmm.
you can build a connection to a pragmatic goal, and then maybe you will be lucky enough to bound this process, to bracket this process
Hmm.
as tightly as to build a mechanistic explanation. Maybe this is the way I would go about it, but most processes are not like that.
And as soon as we break this bracket, the mechanistic explanation might not hold, right? For
Yes,
cognitive level.
yes,
So then the
yes.
question is like, is studying cognition then just stamp collection? There'll be new kind of stamps you will keep on discovering, and you just keep on collecting. And my collection is bigger than yours, and my collection is older than yours.
Yep,
You know,
yep, yep, yeah. Well, I don't know. Elaborate so I can connect
I
because
mean, I mean, I mean, I mean,
it
see,
seemed
see.
a nice statement, but
So see, dynamics is like dynamics is good, right? It evolves and it's dynamics is dynamics. Okay. Dynamics is dynamics in the sense of like, at a super level dynamics is dynamics. It's fleeting, it's changing. So what universal can we derive out of those dynamics? Or do
Mm,
we need to? Because dynamics is changing, right? Everything is different, it's contextual, it's context sensitive. So one of the, you know, can we distill something universal about how the brain works or how cognition works,
mhm, mhm.
or all those searches would be fruitless. So do you believe in universal
Yeah.
grammar, for instance?
Oh, I don't believe in universal grammar in the sense that it is some machine implemented in our brains to
Hmm.
make generative processes in language. But I think that there might be some universal properties of our interaction with each other and interaction with the world, which lead to such our linguistic behaviors that it would seem that
Uh-huh.
we have such a machine. But that's a very different thing. And the same about thinking about the universal processes of dynamics in the world in general, or cognition. So I think that such universals will be found in a sense in very, very high levels. So, the very, for example, change is universal, right? or
Hmm.
or the fact that sometimes there is less change and sometimes there is more change,
Yeah.
right? But what I really worry, it undermines the sort of the objective statement about some universal, is the fact that we are creating what we are at each step. And I think here this philosophy of enactivism is very potent and fruitful, because it sort of does not separate our actions from our cognitions.
Hmm.
And yes, we change this world continuously. We change it for ourselves, and we change it for other people and other animals and species in this earth. And so this is one of the universal properties. And it's strange because it makes science a more moral enterprise, because once you know that you are changing something, and once you know that you have a will to act freely,
Hmm.
then you have a much bigger responsibility for the whole process. So I think that if there are universals, they're on this level, and they probably are kind of verging on moral principles than on strictly, objectively thought science. Um,
But morality is
and
also a product of human evolution, right? I mean, it is grounded in interactions. It's not coming up from a top down somewhere. It's
yeah,
also an evolved, we feel
yeah.
guilt when we are not immoral, because that guilt has served an evolutionary purpose, right?
I don't know if it's so simple. I think when we talk about morals and values in general,
Hmm.
we talk about something that is not, easily describable on the level of an individual.
Hmm.
Yet, yet I give you this, that it is something that we are very much tuned to feel
Hmm. Hmm.
inside. So, for
Yeah.
example, the sense of guilt is this vague thing that I don't think it's easily capturable, and how is it really distinguishable from some kind of sadness, etc. We try to conceptualize it, but it is sort of a the creation of those values is within the environment and within interactions in the environment. So,
Hmm.
so the values are not a system that resides somewhere in one person's brain. We are perceiving everything we are perceiving in terms of values, and also we make our world, we construct our worlds, our how we construct our houses are is based on also on values, and it reenacts values for us. For example, in older houses in the 70s, the kitchen was always separated from the living room because women were supposed to cook dinner and bring it to the living room, not to disturb anybody, right? And then in the 2000s, we have the kitchen integrated with the living room, so everybody can participate in it. So, this is this kind of creation of the environment that
Hmm.
that enacts the values. So I'm not. Yeah, it's. I think I have more sense what to not think about values than how to think about values, because they are sort of like this never mm, finished object of
Hmm.
cognition. That's something that we attain.
Yeah.
We tried. I value very much the work of Bert Hodges, and based also on Ruben Baron's characterization of values. But even the father of cognitive psychology, James Gibson, he wanted to create the psychology of values, and
Hmm.
he saw, in his he has this paper from 1938 about driving.
Hmm.
I think it's 38, and it's how people move around in the environment with a car, and here's those like a field of values, a field of safe travel,
Hmm.
and there is a drawing there that each car is emitting some forces at us, and it's almost like that we when we when you drive next to a big truck, you almost feel it does not do it, but you feel it emits this sort of safety border that you should keep
Yeah.
a safer distance from it, and we feel it in our body, even through our car.
Hmm.
So it is something that we are perceiving in a very complex way, in always in a tension, between my values and the values of interaction that I'm in. And it's just such a complicated thing, and somehow I don't know why there is not more research on that, how values are realized in action and in interaction, because this is how I feel psychology should proceed. It should be as a study of values in interaction, basically. And somehow, this is more a domain of business or or economy, where the value is thought about in a certain way. Um, yeah, and not broadened enough to encompass all the human concerns. So yeah, I know it
Right.
sounded abstract,
So,
but
there's a research is a very kind of embedded enterprise. A lot of socio-cultural, economic issues influence how we think about research. What kind of scientists we fund. What kind
Mhm.
of labs we have, and different points in time. In the history, we have as a society funded different kinds of work. During World War II, World War One, the different kind of research was funded. There was a
Yeah.
biomedical boom in the last few decades, and now things are changing again. So, science is very flickery in terms of the societal acceptance of it. It's a luxury, right, to do science because
It's a what?
it's a luxury to do science, right? You need to have
Yes,
some surplus
percent.
resources, for
Mm-hmm.
some people to pursue the pursuit of knowledge rather than actually, produce commodities for others. So,
Mm-hmm.
and nations wax and wane and societies wax and wane in terms of, and we had dark ages, at least in the way we know about historically. So the question is that uh, so most of the research right now is funded by through biomedical researches through organizations where mandate is to improve the human life, right? And a lot of that is grounded in our mechanistic understanding of physiology, right? Improve physiological processes or improve, you know, uh, conditions caused by diseases or aging and things like that, right? But these kind of ideas, ecological, embedded, inactive, embodied, the 4E ideas, the dynamical systems ideas. These ideas have not, I might be wrong, but they have not gathered momentum in those directions, right? One can say that, they were never given the kind of resources needed to up the game to that standard, but they have never led to that biomedical level of, applications or understanding or treatments, right?
Mhm.
So the question is that as a minority of scientists, interested in these ideas, we can do what we can with our resources, limited resources, but is there any scope for turning these ideas into actual uh, implications where society is willing to support these, or they
Mhm.
remain philosophical, they remain kind of pseudo or uh, I would call it partly science and partly philosophical.
I think that it is already happening, that ecological psychology has more influence than it had. You can see
Mhm.
it in psychotherapy, for example, when where always all the systemic approaches were alive, but indeed, for the past several tens of years, the more predominant narration was about fixing one brain,
Mhm.
in some either in pharmacological treatment or in therapy sessions. But I think that right now, especially in the northern countries, in the Scandinavian countries, you can see that the emphasis of environment and of treating a human being like a human being in a certain environment is prescribed as a remedy.
Mhm.
And more houses like that are appearing, and environments like that are appearing. More and more um, prescriptions, even by doctors, concern our environment. I mean,
Mhm.
I heard recently that you can get a prescription for walking in the forest in Great Britain, which is something that is rather new, and you
Mhm.
get, free pass to national parks with from your doctor. So I think that more and more we are aware
Yeah,
that sometimes, and much safer also, it is to do the it's a matter of where in the system to apply the force. So where to intervene in a system that is malfunctioning. And I
yeah.
think more and more people are realize that this intervention can be either on the level of an individual and his or her biology, or at the level of the environment, and especially social environment that this person is immersed in.
Mhm.
And it's sometimes really much healthier. I know such cases in both from the practice of my friends who are therapists and from first-hand cases that were related to me, that after years of going to a therapy, a young person decides to work in a factory for a year, and all of a sudden it helps better, right? Then
Mhm.
not everybody can effectuate such change because it's a huge life change, but sometimes this kind of interventions can be healthier for the body, because when you mess up pharmacologically with something, you never affect only one thing, right?
Mhm. Of course, yeah.
While when you do a controlled environment change, you might be you may do it in a much more controlled way. For example, not completely cut your ties with the previous environment or have some structured interaction of both environments. And
Hmm.
yet this environment, and I think, you see more and more of that, even in this kind of self-help guides how to better study. What you are doing is you are using ecological psychology. You design your environment. You do a tomato, pomodoro, because you
Hmm.
know that 50 to remind yourself about your cyclical attention fluctuations. I don't know, you can get your accountability body, to set up the social environment to study.
Hmm.
So I think slowly, before we had a lot of ecological psychology present in design. For
Hmm.
example, how crossroads are designed in a way that, when you get closer to a roundabout or a crossroad, you can, in many cities, you have stripes on the road or poles that are increasing in
Yeah, yeah,
density.
yeah, yeah.
So it makes people automatically, slow down. Also, how we design things with affordances, the work of ecological psychologists is also there. But I think in general, this attention, after this movement for e-cognition, it occurred that environment is important, even though
Hmm.
it is ecology or environment is not any of the E's, but indirectly it boils down to that we can design our environment and it can help us to to shape our dynamics, right?
Hmm.
So I think that mm, I would be, the question is how to make it more prominent. And yes, it does need, you know, a change in our system, because of course the pharmacological way of interfering with some of the malfunctions is sometimes very effective,
Hmm.
but sometimes, but the whole industry and the way to make money also is geared toward this at this moment. So how to change it on a more global way? Well, we have to notice that the other way is also efficient, and somehow the policies should be such that the other ways of interventions are also mm, sustainable, right? That's it.
No, it makes sense because I mean I think we live in a neuro-chauvinistic world, right? In some ways, I mean, a neuron is like the boss, uh, right? So I mean, for good or bad, but we do record a lot from neurons, right? Or cluster of neurons, right? And
That we do. Sorry, but
we,
something
we
is.
we do record a lot from neurons and clusters of neurons, right? And they
Mm.
make for pretty graphs. Okay.
Yeah, that's true. Even though they are idealized as
Yeah,
the
exactly.
graphs.
Exactly, right? But they make pretty graphs, right? And they're rigorous, right? And we like something rigorous. So the question is like how do we look at the environment more rigorously? Like uh okay, let's say I mean coming back to value, right? You said value system, right? So so we value the right now, the scientific establishment, generally speaking, it values rigor, right? Rigor is a benchmark for science, right? At least
Hmm.
theoretically, it values rigor and replicability more than epistemology.
Hmm.
Okay.
Okay.
So now the question is that if we have to cater to that value, right? Is there any way that we can study environment while catering to that value? It's a compromise, right? Because we want our value is in studying the environment, but at the same time, the scientific establishment caters that kind of rigor and that kind of presentation or structure.
Hmm.
So so do you see cases where there have been rigorous exploration of these ideas outside the brain? Uh, or because one can criticize that, those kind of ideas very easily transform into philosophy and more words and jargons, which has happened, in the past. We have much more books on embodied cognition now, or, including my own coming, and, in activism. But what have you done, physiologically? What have you done, with the body, with the organism, with the
Hmm.
diseases, right? So you cannot just say that it is embodied in active, the 4E, and then stop there, right? What's the
Hmm.
next step? That's that in a way is a constraint on how you explore and how you look for things. But
Hmm.
where is that actual looking?
Yeah, I think there are several ways um, to make this connection from, let's say, human concerns and
Mhm.
practice and science. Um, I think one way is to study brain in naturalistic environments, which is very difficult but not impossible right now,
Mhm.
and to study physiology of a human as a part of cognition in natural environments also. So, the very studies that show that the minute somebody walks in the room, your galvanic skin response changes, and of course, it changes your attention and everything. Look what we have done when studying the brain. We put the brain in a lab, in a
Mhm.
jar, in a sense, and we pretend that what we show to the brain, which means the controlled stimuli,
Mhm.
have anything to do with the real life. Well, usually it doesn't.
Yes.
We don't even have stimuli in the environment. I mean,
Mhm.
look around you and show me one stimulus. Maybe I am a stimulus to you right now, but I am
Mhm.
a very prolonged one in
Mhm.
in time. So this is partly especially when it comes to studies of psychology, cognition, cognitive science, brain, but in general, biology. It's not physics. And the methods that are good for physics might not be should not set the values maybe so strongly. So one way is to make the studies more ecological. Second, to maybe loosen or not loosen, but take a little bit different set of values for different kinds of investigations. But also, I have to say that recently we have this, an activistic and there's this awareness that what we see depends on our actions, permeate even physics. I mean, you have this great book, the Blind Spot of Science, I think it's called, right,
Mhm.
from last year. And those are physicists together with Evan Thompson who just points to the fact that physics is also not free from subjectivity, and maybe this just maybe this is still a, like, logical positivist mythology that haunts us until this day. Some people say that it haunts less physicists than psychologists. That
Mhm.
psychologists are sort of stuck mm, in those assumptions that are a bit unrealistic. So yes,
Mhm.
again, the answer is too abstract maybe, but mm, I think both sides need to take steps. I think right now that science still has this kind of hubris to itself, like Wendell Berry would write about it, that it is sort of, in a sense, it has to do it for to be replicable and for the results of research to be stable, reliable. But on the other hand, it also has to admit that it is a human endeavor, and
Mhm.
that there are different ways to cognize reality. The other one is, I don't know, through meditation, maybe. And it science, I think the hubris would be just realize that scientists are humans who just have a very particular trajectory of learning to look at things. And this trajectory is nice. It brings nice results in some cases, but it might not in other cases. I would not, for example, want to have a person explained. What does it mean to explain a person? Okay, I don't mind when somebody wants to explain to me how, or in general, explains how electricity works. It's fine, but it's not. Some subjects, some objects of the study are subjects also, and they don't yield so easily to these kinds of explanations. And a human person is such. Wouldn't it be awful for somebody to say, "Oh, I completely understood you, Madhur," right? That's
Hmm.
not the way that that's not the explanation that we need for human persons. My very personal look at personality psychology, for example, when you can categorize people to personality types, is just mistaken. I mean, it doesn't. I'm not sure it gives us the purchase it's claiming to give us.
Hmm. Okay. So, okay, I see. I mean, the thing is like, I mean, we are so trained to think in those constraints, right? It's hard to figure something else out and see where it will lead to.
You mean from the constraints of science, or
Yeah, yeah.
I
Because
don't
because
know
I
what.
I, I myself think of, like a Popperian chauvinist,
Yeah, but why don't you think, as a CP Snow, the two cultures? Okay, that was a chauvinistic book too. I have it right here, so I can show it. But it is unnerving how easily he classifies people, to human sciences and exact sciences. Of course, it's not like that, but you can see that this. I mean, we are people, and scientists are also people, and the way is through the education. Not to make it just education in exact science or just human science, but to skillfully mix the two so both are perceived as valuable. Wait, I'll just grab the book.
Yeah.
This is what I was talking about, right?
Okay, I didn't know about this book.
Yeah, but this is a long, long time ago. He wrote it, and Howard Patti told me that he was present at Harvard when he gave those lectures, CP Snow, and people were furious. And I am not surprised because this book is infuriating in its simplifying the picture. On the other hand, it makes some very, very good points, that there is not one way to look at reality, and all of them are valid. And I mean, uh, scientists are also, when I started my studying, I was taught that a scientist is an objective, some objective entity that is disinterested and driven only by curiosity. But this is simply not true. Curiosity is just one of the things that drives us. And I
Hmm.
think when I observe it, the evolution of science, I think science is driven more and more by pragmatic
Yeah.
concerns, and not only curiosity, which is of course natural and always will be there.
Hmm.
This is the beauty and unpredictability also of human beings. Mm, yes, uh, there are even, I mean, admitting that you have some preconceptions and that something is driving you is nothing wrong with that, right? So,
Hmm.
and also nothing wrong with saying that, okay, there is a huge group of people that are not scientists, and or they mm, and they also do very, very nice things for the humanity. So it is just maybe this hegemony of science could be questioned, not in the sense of not believing in science, because
Hmm.
I think that this kind of hubris that Wendell Berry is writing about in his book Life is a Miracle, um, this makes people turn away from science. And and if we made it just a human endeavor, maybe more people would be able to turn to science as as a human
So
activity. Right.
can you elaborate on this? Like, can you give a little examples? Like how uh, how can that hubris be reduced and be more made more human? You
Hmm.
by more human, you mean by more participation of people as a
In,
as
in
an
discourse.
activity? Yeah.
Yeah, in many discourses. Well, one example can be the use of large language models
Hmm.
now, right? So scientists seeing them, a lot of scientists, as a great way to, stochastically use the co-occurrence of words to help summarize, to help getting a gist of a huge number of texts. But we also should look at how it impinges our relations with other people. And this is something that science is not often interested in, right? So if we give those tools to just some set of people, and they will use it extensively, introducing a huge number of texts that are created by those tools. They are skewing our language pool in general. Is this good? Would this skewing be in the right direction? And for I'm just saying that for
Hmm.
answering those questions, you don't need only scientists. A good
Hmm.
writer would be a huge help here. A good I don't know, artist would
Hmm.
be a fantastic addition here. Or perhaps just people who have experiences,
Yeah.
parents who who educate their children. I mean, they should be allowed to have a more say in all this. So, for example,
So.
I don't know. I don't want to. Maybe it's not safe to touch the vaccination problem, but I also have a feeling that people who do not believe that vaccination is good, they just don't. They have a don't have a chance to really discuss it because it's always going into this dividing of no, these people are right, they are scientists, they know. And we know cases from history where vaccination maybe was not as great as it is now, right? Because now we have better ways of
Yeah,
testing.
yeah,
But
yeah.
these people do not need to know
And,
all
and
this
scientists have
history.
been regularly wrong about a lot of things.
Yeah, also, but
Yeah.
so only an open discourse from many domains, not only disciplines,
Hmm.
can and again coming to the, the image, metaphorical image of fractal, I think it would be nothing wrong to do it on the level of an individual. I went to a mathematical high school,
Hmm.
and and in general, the literature classes, and the humanistic subjects were treated as, as we say, fifth wheel of the car, just and not the spare one, but just unnecessary. So they
Hmm.
were not taught on the level that they should
But
have
then
been
people
in
might
order to
complain.
to
But
contextualize mathematics, for example.
yeah, but people will complain that, for instance, I know some institutes where humanities were organized, were implemented along with, high technologies. And soon the students turned very political. Now students are more interested in political discourse than actually science.
Hmm.
Or for which, I mean, so taxpayers are funding you, let's say, for a very highly subsidized education in India. to actually produce technological solutions, like you're almost getting free education, free living, and then you open to have humanities, program, and within a few years, students are just interested in political discourse, and the technological aspect is compromised. There have been cases like that, right?
Mhm,
So,
mhm.
so one can argue that, uh, it's very hard to maintain, you know, uh,
It is. I don't have solutions.
mm,
Maybe apart from the very simple solution of respecting each other.
mhm.
So I think that everybody is fighting their battle,
Battle. Yeah, yeah.
and
Somebody is fighting. Some people are fighting somebody else's battle as well. But yeah, okay. Okay, okay. Coming back to large language models. Okay, you made some really interesting points of the statistics and skewing the statistics, right? So,
Mhm.
so we see a lot of work, a lot of hype about large language models and AI. But when I actually look at who is using AI, my parents don't care, for instance. Okay. Their doctors don't care either. Their engineers don't care. Their plumbers don't care. A lot of people they deal with in the everyday basis, they just don't care. But there's like this class of people who feed themselves, by writing or by creating trails of words, by organizing letters, alphabets.
Yeah.
Scientists are the epitome of those people,
Yep.
right? Uh,
Yeah.
Scientists are the epitome. Doctors write prescriptions as well. Uh, Companies, people write codes. Again, they are getting paid to create sequences out of letters, right? Code writers are basically sequence creators, right? They're just creating a different kind of sequence.
Mhm.
This is the class of people who are using the large language models the most,
Mhm.
right? Because they process so much of sequences, they need language models, and because they write so many sequences, now they're using large language models to sequence, right? So they have,
It's a good point.
right?
Yes.
So they
Mhm.
have created this, and including myself, they have created this aura, around among themselves
Mm.
that this is what language is, this is the future of language, and here we are, right? So definitely it is queuing because the rate of production is very high, right? I myself can do a lot of things with AI. I mean, it is amazing formatting tool, so I don't need to spend as much time formatting my text now, for instance. You can brainstorm ideas with it. I mean, amazing capabilities. So it is queuing, but it is queuing that text for everyone who will consume the text,
Mhm.
right? In terms of the statistical structure. So you made this important point, but what do you think would be implications of that?
Mm.
Like what's the problem with
Mm.
it? Because we have always skewed things, right? When we talk about furniture, like houses, you are in the US right now, right? You will see much less diversity of houses here, for instance,
Mhm.
right? Because all is coming from like a few companies, right? Like same kind of windows, same kind of doors, mass produced.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, uh, so so whichever aspect we look for, people who were in a position to influence, they created the world in their own image, right? Look at cars, for instance, they all look the same now.
Mhm.
But that doesn't affect our safety. In fact, now cars are less diverse than before. We don't see like yellow, pink, and blue colors of cars like we saw in like 30, 40 years back. But we do have much safer cars now,
Mhm.
right? So yes, language might be skewed, but what's the problem with language being skewed?
Well, I think this problem has been formulated already by William James.
Hmm.
He did not think about large language models, but he pointed to the process even within a human being, that a human being who is not in touch with other human beings and with the world by doing things in the world and using and consuming only texts, mainly texts, can slip away from what this text is about. That's the quote from the sleep is from William James. And so he was worrying that we slip away from acquaintance with the world to the knowledge about the world. And to a pragmatist or to an ecological psychologist, this is a problem because this is what happens when you feed a large language model with only large language models text, then by several generations they lose sense. I was told that such research was done. I cannot quote them right now, but I know that many people were trying to just, just train and train solely with the text generated with the
Mm-hmm.
ChatGPT.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the skewing, it has several problems. One problem, I think, is how those models are done right now, which is just a sort of partisan, partly illegal scraping of internet, and basically you have your model trained on Mein Kampf as well as you have it trained on, Madeleine Albright's book. So all kind of stuff is there and is influencing the relationships of the words and the sequences of words that are produced. There is some attempt of cleaning, there is some attempt of, I don't know, training the model on, for example, constitutions, and there is this constitutional AI, right? But still, what is there is unbound, right? And I would prefer large language models used as not general purpose device, but a specific purpose device. I would love, for example, to have all the anatomy books and nothing more to be put in one conversational system. That would be super helpful,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's one problem that we have no control over what is within this language, large language models, and that all kinds of conceptual systems are shaping those strings of words on which the models are trained.
Mm-hmm.
And this sample is not controlled and not representative and not, not, I don't think it can be a model of language, okay, in any deeper sense. The second thing is that the moment that we create a text via a large language model, nobody has read and experienced this text. And when we are talking about the relation between dynamics and symbols,
Mm-hmm.
this relation also includes that a form produced by you, for example, if you right now would produce a sentence that would somehow offend me,
Mm-hmm.
then I would feel offended and I
Mm-hmm.
would react physiologically. How could you say this, Madhur?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And I would react probably, you would probably repair
Yeah, yeah,
because, of course, you wouldn't have meant it.
yeah.
But see, this reaction is extremely important, and I am worrying that as long as we are creating texts, okay, mainly
Yeah.
on a stolen
Yeah. Yeah.
property,
Mm-hmm.
but as long as we read this
Mm-hmm.
and feel it, experience the text, and then let it act on another person, then it's more or less okay. But I am afraid that we will start, having chatbots chatting to each other, and then
Yeah.
at the end of the process, there will be a human who would be affected by this text, but nobody would have checked
Mm.
those string of words for the values that are
So,
included.
or we may be jaded, we will just extract the information rather than any other content from it. Like no
Mm,
physiological response and no, or very little, effective component, and all it will be left for will be like transfer of information. That's all.
but it's not possible to transfer only information. I think that all the information that is in the world is connected to our
No,
value and
I
system,
agree. I
right?
agree. We would just be
Okay.
jaded, or we will be numb. We will be numb to the
Hmm.
effective side of effective content of the language.
Yeah, but
Because,
sometimes we wouldn't know if the given message is coming from a model or from a
yeah,
human.
that's
So
true.
then we cannot immunize ourselves to that.
Hmm.
And I think those are very serious concerns. And again, a couple of very strong humanists, thinkers
Hmm.
should be there always, co-designing those things, and definitely in co-designing policy. towards those things. I think the humanities right now have anthropology, psychology, cognitive science,
Mhm.
history, literature, art. They have too little to
So,
say about this
but
development of.
I'll stroke a very common sentiment here that the technology people or the scientists, the statisticians who have created these models, they would say that, these people don't create things. There's that divide, right? They just come to dictate us, what we do when we have created, when we have raised the money, when we have worked hard. That's when they come and tell us, policy and regulations. So
Mhm.
what's counter to that?
I think that nothing should be done without informed consent of the adults engaged in the process. So I think that the best way is to. I think there are many technology people engaged in technology creation
Mm-hmm.
who ask themselves those questions.
Hmm.
And some of them leave the companies that they work for, and not a small number
Yeah,
of
that's true.
them. And I would rather that they stayed there and had a space to discuss what their concerns are, because they have their concerns. I was
Mhm.
actually terrorized and traumatized when I read, I don't remember the names right now, but I read an interview with a guy who was responsible for designing a button to report, I think in Facebook or whatever, this of those social media platforms. He was responsible for designing a button through which you could report that something is inappropriate.
Hmm.
Okay, and he was working for it for several years. He noticed that something is wrong there when his 15-year-old daughter came to him at home and said that she has a problem with something.
Hmm.
So the guy was working in this environment for
Hmm.
several years, designing the very button that would have helped his daughter,
Hmm.
and he didn't manage to do it. I
Hmm.
mean, so it means that only a human concern that is
Hmm.
never switched off, because fortunately the guy is also a father.
Hmm.
But we need something for those people to notice this earlier, right? And not when it is way too late and
Yeah.
so many people have been already hurt by
Hmm.
social media, right? So this is the, to give the space to human concerns. I mean, this is not too much
Hmm.
to ask.
Yeah.
And just I think those concerns are thwarted by the fact that this is a huge company that needs to make a profit, and it is operating in conditions of such and such country. That's it.
Hmm. I see, I see. I think there should be blasphemy awards and
Blasphemy awards.
awards and people should
Yeah.
be awarded for blasphemy rather than penalized.
Or for whistleblowing. Yeah, there are, I think, but well, it is very, very
I mean,
difficult to.
yeah, I personally feel that whistleblowing is I can't think of myself as a whistleblower, but I can think of myself as a blasphemous
Mhm.
person.
Because
So
blasphemy, I don't know. For me, blasphemy is something, that you do to a god, but maybe
I
I'm.
mean, so strictly speaking, the way we define blasphemy uh, is the act of offense of speaking against sacrilegiously about God or sacred things. But
Mhm,
at the same time, in sciences and arts and in every human endeavor, you have things that take the form of sacred entities
mhm.
that you cannot question, and be part of that culture or you're penalized, to ask those sacred
Yeah, 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 yeah.
things and
Yeah, but
for every
just
field.
think, just
Yeah.
think what I mean. I think it has to work the other way around. I mean, this sort of the conditions for blasphemy should be better somehow, or for what you are defining as
Yeah, of course
blasphemy.
you
For
yeah.
speaking the conditions for speaking human concerns
Huh.
should be more favorable, and because then even if you have such an award, the hell that the person would go through before getting this award would probably, result in her or him not getting it.
I agree. I think so.
I think
Yeah.
there is many very good examples of people who voiced the concerns, and
Mhm.
Emily Bender or Melanie Mitchell are one of those people.
Yeah.
Then Gebru Timnit, I think. Yes, that's her name. Just to name several, but these movements are there. It's just the question is, why aren't they heard? And I have a sneaking suspicion that if this company wasn't so huge and so oriented to, and so entered in a rat race, in a sense, then maybe they would have been heard. I have a feeling that companies, for example, in the Scandinavian countries, are designed a little bit differently.
Mhm.
It is a question of designing the organization itself. Of course, it most often self-organizes and self-designs, but I don't have ready solutions, but I would be very interested in collaborating on designing them, definitely.
I see. That makes sense.
Don't we have to finish, Madur? We are talking already.
Yeah, we have to
Yeah.
finish. We can finish in a few minutes. Yeah.
Okay. No, it's just
Okay.
for the poor listeners who would decide to play this video
Oh,
until the
so
end.
I have some people.
We greet you warmly
Yeah.
that you are so patient.
No, so I have some listeners who just told me that, I went to the channel and every video was like more than 2 hours, so I stopped. I said like maybe that's not for me. So some have requested to put shorts, but I want to have the full conversation, so I don't do any editing,
Hmm.
because
Yeah,
it,
but maybe an edited version, like a how do you call it, a trailer? Yeah, something like that.
oh
Yeah.
yeah. I do it alone myself, like you need like once it grows, I can probably have somebody to help me with it because doing science itself is too much of work and then
You have over 100 videos right now, right? If I'm
no,
not
I think
mistaken.
it's in 40s right now.
In the 40s. Because you have also others from your work. Okay. Mhm.
Hmm. Yeah. So yeah, that was great. So far, since we need to end, what is your understanding? This is the last question from you. What are we gaining in terms of our understanding about the human language with the LLMs?
Mm.
Like, is it something that we were under an impression which is completely like blown away now, given how LLMs work, or is it something new space which we have discovered?
I think we learn a huge number of things. Maybe I will mention just a couple for brevity. But
Mhm.
one thing that we learn is how much information is there in the mutual relationships just between signs. And this is amazing that language, but it is not because language is independent of the human activity, but rather that language is so ingrained in human activity that
Mhm.
this time series, because language is just a time series that we produce. We
Mhm.
are a dynamical system. We
Mhm.
produce a time series,
Yeah.
and because we are a dynamical system, this one time series has information about everything else in us, which
Yes.
is super great.
Mhm.
But I did not expect that this information can be somehow revealed just by looking at relations among words. So this is one thing that we learned. The
Mhm.
other thing is more linguistic. I think it's about grammar
Mhm.
itself, because also those models create pretty good grammatical sentences.
Almost they never make mistakes. Almost never.
Right now, yes, better and better. And look, nobody put in any uh, generative rules there. There are now probably there are some ideas to prune, to help the models not to be so data relying, and to put some constraints. But those rules are somehow present in the constraints, in the layers and connections
Hmm.
in a distributed way,
Hmm.
and they are not as generativists, for example, thought about it, and that it's a generative machine, nor any other grammarians who try to formalize grammar. It's a very dynamical grammar,
Hmm.
and I think it is a big lesson for linguists and for psycholinguists. How to think about grammar in a human way. On the other hand, yeah, I think that we also should be really even more motivated to study things beyond large language models. So, how language appears in interaction and how come it is so ingrained in our activity and so much in touch with our activity in the world and in interaction between each other that it can have so much information.
Right. So,
So,
and that is beyond us as we started, that is beyond us,
yep.
that's within the environment and within the
Yeah.
spoken language than actually inside the head.
So I'm just very much opposed to think about LLMs as intelligent beings, as
Hmm.
some people do, or general AI or whatever.
Hmm.
No, those are just the systems are modulators of our human relationships, and that's how they should be treated.
Yeah. They do inherit, they are good statistical emulators.
Yeah, they are good statistical what?
Emulators.
Emulators. Yeah, yeah.
So we are
Yes.
we are generating a statistical pattern, which is very much what we do. Uh,
hmm
you know, uh, so yeah.
Yeah, but put them in their own place, as you are saying. They
Hmm.
are so much concerned for us because we are dealing with those string of words.
Hmm.
Fortunately, not for example, the
I
cooks in a great restaurant who need to cook delicious food, and they need to really have the practice of
so so
doing.
so so exactly right. So that brings back again to us to very brief, to Patty, right? Like rate versus time dependent processes, right? Cooking, the way we cook is basically time dependent process. It's only the recipe that is rate dependent, right? And
Yep,
that's the place where LLMs are, right?
yep, exactly. Wow, good example at the end.
Yeah. So thanks, Jana. Thanks for a wonderful conversation.
Thank
Uh,
you. I
hopefully, we ourselves have learned something.
Yes, I enjoyed it very much as well. Thank you for great questions, and it was a great pleasure.
Yeah, have a great stay ahead in the States.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Hope to see you soon. Ciao.
Bye.